Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic. Let's do it. People who know someone who died in a freak accident. What happened? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I used to work for a septic company. The guy who drove one of the big septic trucks that sucked out underground septic tanks at people's houses had to get on his hands and knees and reach into the tank because the lid had fallen in. He lost his balance and fell headfirst in. His shoulders got wedged in the opening and he drowned upside down in human waste. I don't think I've ever heard of a worse way to go. The homeowner found him after about an hour. This happened a long time ago, but a neighbor was trying to weld a gas tank and didn't realize that he should have filled it with water beforehand. The tank exploded, killed him. A family friend bumped his head, walked about 15 feet across his backyard, sat at his picnic table, and died. Autopsy showed no head trauma, but he broke his neck when he hit his head. They figured the walk across the yard caused something to shift enough to do fatal damage to his spinal cord. A former coworker of mine was gored by a bison while on a trail run. Ironically, he often posted on message boards for the park to be aware of wild animals while there, and in one post, he said there are too many people with headphones on, or trying to get too close to the bison to take selfies. He was normally very careful, apparently. Well, this one hits home as a trail runner myself, although granted on Long Island, trails are not, the most things I see, maybe an occasional fox, so no big ones, and deer. But yeah, be vigilant, and it's sad. A guy I knew was setting up a rope swing over a lake for his kids and their friends, which he had done many times before. He always would take a practice swing himself before he would let the kids go. His hand slipped off the rope and he fell before he was over the lake. He hit his head on a rock and died in front of the kids. When I was a 13-year-old boy, I witnessed my grandfather die. He was less than 15 feet away from me when he was decapitated by shrapnel from a broken piece of heavy farm equipment. I'm 50 years old and still struggle with that moment in time. PTSD can be a real bitch. A friend of my dad's was overseeing a repaired, braided 3/4-inch cable being spooled from one drum to another at very high speed and tension. He had his gloved hand loosely on the wire, guiding it into position, a big no-no in the industry. A frayed wire came through, snapped his glove, and dragged him into the drum, wrapping him into a contorted paste within seconds. My neighbor was cleaning his gutters and fell off his roof because he missed his footing when stepping. Fell right on his head. This was a few years back now, but the family moved quickly after, even though it had been their house for like 30 years. Can't say I blame them. A friend slipped and fell in the tub, cracked his head. His roommate found him a half hour later, died on the way to the hospital. One of my mom's friends was coming back from walking her 2 dogs. Walking up the front steps to her house, dogs saw a squirrel. Wrapped the leashes around her legs, she fell and hit her head on the brick steps and had an aneurysm. No one was home at the time. A friend of mine was riding his 4-wheeler out at an off-road park. He kicked up a tree branch that impaled him in the thigh. He bled to death before anyone even knew it happened. A girl I grew up with was driving home in college and got into a horrible car accident that gave her brain damage and pretty much removed her jaw from her skull. Tons of surgery, and 3 years later, she walked down the aisle at her wedding. She was in her yard a few months after her wedding and slipped and tripped and felt dizzy and fell. They aren't sure and hit her head on pavement patio, and her husband found her dead. It's horribly tragic, and I'm not trying to make light of this at all, but it sounded almost like a Final Destination type thing, so sad. An old buddy I had known since elementary school died while driving when a chunk of loose gravel was kicked up through his windshield by a passing truck on the freeway. His best friend had been riding in the passenger side and had to steer to safety. It was nobody's fault, just a complete freak accident. I've always felt terrible for the friend who had to watch it happen. I think about my friend who died a lot. He was a really cool guy. I still remember playing basketball with him during recess when we were kids. It's strange to think that he never could have known how his life would end or see it coming in any way. That kid I used to play basketball thought he still had an entire life ahead of him. A guy I went to high school with was helping his family do some repairs to a silo on their family farm. A section of the silo's roofing gave way in and he went, suffocated under thousands of pounds of grain. My uncle was mowing grass on an embankment next to a small body of water. The mower unexpectedly slipped down the embankment and overturned on top of him, pinning him under the water. He drowned in a few feet of water that he otherwise could have stood up in. Swimming, and one of my buddies was screwing with the grate thing over the drain at the bottom, got his foot stuck and couldn't extricate himself. His brother, cousin, and I nearly drowned trying to free him, so we got to watch him die. Haven't thought about this one in a bit. My uncle was refilling a Zippo lighter while smoking. Somehow it caught fire. He set himself on fire. He was in the bathroom. He tried to reach the shower. The extremely flammable shower curtain caught on fire, and he inhaled large amounts of toxic smoke. He died a few days later, mainly from lung issues and not so much from the burns. Childhood friend of mine drowned. His leg got trapped swimming in a relatively shallow river. He went down and just never came back up. It happened to one of the nicest people I ever knew, and it makes me so mad that we lost touch before I found out what happened. My sister-in-law's aunt died of hypothermia. She went for a walk out in the hills in the winter. She knew the trail very well, but got disoriented by a light snowfall and got lost. She got cold and tired, laid down by a rock, and died of hypothermia. She was 100 yards from her car. A guy I went to high school with got hit by a train. It wasn't suicide. It was before Uber, and he had been at a party drinking. He did the responsible thing by taking the subway. When he heard the train coming, he stood up to take a step forward like everyone does, but was so drunk that he stumbled over his own feet and fell into the track. A man I knew was in a boat with some family and friends. It was getting dark, and they were heading back in. Tide rose a bit more than they were anticipating. They went under a bridge while he was standing up and hit his head. He was a genuinely good man that was heavily involved in his community for the better and loved his family and his employees dearly. It's all tragic. I mean, just out for a nice boat ride, you hit your head, and it's all over. Sounded like a good man. I had a classmate who was working outside, got stung by a wasp and had an allergic reaction and died less than 24 hours later. He was married 7 months. They were working on starting a family. His wife had to make the final decision as he was completely brain dead. A friend of mine from college had a summer job driving a big delivery truck. At the end of the day, they'd come back, park the trucks, and then check the tires to make sure they weren't overheated or required any other maintenance. So, my friend brought his delivery truck back after his shift and then knelt down in front of it to check the tires. One was clearly overheated, so he loosened it to take it off and relieve some of the pressure and heat. The pressure was so great that the tire exploded in his face, but that wasn't what killed him. When it exploded, the hubcap and metal inner wheel, apologies, I'm blanking on what the metal frame of the tire is called, of the tire caught him right under the chin. It knocked him backwards with such force that it crushed the back of his head. He was only 22. My brother was killed beside me when we were walking home from school. A drunk driver came peeling ass down the street and hit him. He was dead on impact. The car sideswiped me so fast I didn't know what happened at first. 1 second we were walking, the next second there's a thud noise, and suddenly I'm whipping around in a circle and landing on the ground. Turns out the guy was going 168 kilometers an hour in the 40 kilometer an hour school zone. Knew a guy who was in a car crash and saw his aunt almost beheaded. He was about 10, screwed up his mind. At about 20, he flipped his dirt bike with his girlfriend on the back and it cracked her head open. Was deep in the woods camping. She died. A couple years later, he was stealing a motorcycle, walking it across the street at night in the rain, and got hit by a car. Lost a leg. A couple years after that, he was angry at a music venue, so he and a friend tried to build a bomb in the parking lot. It went off, and they both were killed. Kid I was friends with in middle school was riding his bike without a helmet, hit a rock, and went head over handlebars right at a T intersection. As he was getting up, an old lady driving on the cross street somehow dropped her glasses and bent over to pick them up. Didn't see him. The coroner said that Nick would have survived either crash on its own, but the combination of the two killed him. He used to sneak into class early before school and draw a little flower pot with a cartoon daisy in it, and then he'd write the word "Hello, flower" under it. He must have done that 100 times. The day after he died, the teacher let the whole class draw "Hello, flower" on the chalkboard. A buddy of mine from high school, and we also happened to go to the same college. He was handsome, a freak athlete, heavy drinker and partier. All the girls wanted him, and his family was uber wealthy. He had it all, but he was a huge unnecessary risk taker. He felt invincible. He would always succumb to dares or challenges like drinking a whole handle of vodka and even a gallon of milk. This was the 2000s. Anyway, one summer break we were playing golf. He was on the side or outside of the golf cart hanging on while it was being whipped around the course. Hit a big unexpected bump. He falls off, hits his head on a rock, dies instantly. So effing tragic. Be safe, kids.